For 22-year-old Catherine, October was supposed to mark a new beginning. After months of fear, she had finally separated from her abusive husband. She found comfort in routine, working shifts at PetSmart in Greenville, South Carolina, surrounded by the animals she adored. For the first time in a long while, her life seemed calm. She was smiling again, reconnecting with friends, dreaming about going back to school. October was supposed to be her fresh start. But on the afternoon of October 23, 2016, Catherine left work at 2:15 p.m. She told her co-workers she'd see them the next day. She never made it home. 3 days later, her body was discovered in the basement of an abandoned farmhouse, a place that had stood empty for decades. Almost immediately, one name surfaced in everyone's mind: her estranged husband, John Tufton Blavelt. Katie, as she was affectionately known, was born on August 8, 1994, in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. The middle child of Patricia and John Biter, she grew up in a close-knit family alongside her brother Brandon and her sister Brittany. Her family remembers her as bright, full of warmth, and endlessly kind. She loved animals and dreamed of one day opening a shelter of her own. At 20, she met a man who would change her life forever. His name was John Blavelt. He was a recruiter for the U.S. Army, handsome, charming, and confident. When Katie met him at a restaurant next to the recruiting office, he seemed like everything she'd ever wanted: mature, stable, protective. John, 6 years her senior, had built a reputation in Simpsonville as a disciplined and respected soldier. He carried himself like someone you could trust. To Katie's parents, he seemed like a good man. Their relationship began as professional. John was, after all, a recruiter, but soon it turned romantic. By 2015, Katie decided to enlist herself, partly inspired by him. She completed basic training but was medically discharged after 2 months due to spinal issues. John comforted her through it, promising they'd build a life together. In 2016, they married. Katie moved into John's home. She imagined a family, a quiet life, and maybe someday, a house full of pets. But those dreams didn't last long. Behind closed doors, John was not the man he appeared to be. He began inviting underage teenagers to the house. There were parties every weekend: music, alcohol, marijuana, even harder drugs. Katie was uncomfortable, pleading with him to stop. But John brushed her off. Among the regulars was a 17-year-old girl named Hannah Thompson, a student at Hillcrest High School. Investigators would later describe Hannah as completely infatuated with John. She followed him everywhere. One officer said she was like his puppy, doing whatever he asked, even when it crossed moral lines. And she despised Katie. By early 2016, the marriage had completely fallen apart. Katie packed her things and left. Just days later, Hannah moved into John's house and into his bed. On February 26, 2016, Hannah's father called police. His daughter hadn't come home in 2 weeks. Officers went to John's house and found her there. He was arrested for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. That same day, Katie filed a domestic violence report, telling police that a month earlier, John had pointed a gun at her head during an argument. The Army reacted swiftly. John's pay was cut. His career, his reputation, everything that had once defined him, was gone. He blamed Katie for it all, and he told his friends he'd get revenge. Over the next few months, the situation around John's house became darker. Teenagers came and went. Drugs circulated freely. One of the regulars, 16-year-old Allie Somerville, would later testify that the house was a constant party and that John talked openly about wanting Katie gone. She recalled a handwritten note taped to the refrigerator that read simply, "Get rid of Katie for good." By October, Katie had an official restraining order against John. Friends and family said she finally seemed to be moving forward, smiling more, talking about new plans, even laughing again. But John wasn't letting go. Investigators would later discover his internet history from the weeks before Katie's death. Search after search, all pointing to something sinister. How to sharpen a knife. How to hide a body. What do I do when my wife dies? The questions revealed everything. October 23, 2016, started like any other day. Katie clocked into her shift at PetSmart. She loved the animals, her co-workers, the quiet routine. After her shift ended around 2:15 p.m., she walked to her car, planning to meet a friend later that evening. But she never arrived. Hours later, her phone would be used for the final time, a selfie taken from inside her car. She looked peaceful, completely unaware that her estranged husband was nearby, waiting. According to later testimony, Hannah Thompson had driven John to the area near Katie's workplace that afternoon. Investigators believe she dropped him off, then left to circle back later. At 5:03 p.m., John called Hannah. A minute later, he sent a Snapchat message saying, "Check out your Snapchat." The content of that message was deleted, but investigators suspect it contained evidence of what had just happened. Katie's body was found days later inside a concrete box in the basement of an old farmhouse in Simpsonville, a place she had played in as a child. Evidence showed she had fought desperately for her life. DNA under her fingernails, signs of struggle. She never stood a chance against her much larger attacker. After killing her, John drove her car to a parking lot on White Horse Road and abandoned it. Hannah followed in another vehicle, helping him escape. The discovery of Katie's body shocked the entire community. Her mother, Patricia, was devastated. "I was totally empty inside," she said. She didn't deserve this. When investigators informed John of his wife's death, his reaction was immediate and disturbing. He didn't ask how she died or where she was found. His first words were, "She flipped my life upside down." Within days, John and Hannah disappeared. The manhunt that followed would span 6 years and multiple states. John and Hannah traveled across the country, often living on the streets, relying on John's military training to stay hidden. They were spotted in New Mexico, Texas, and California before the trail went cold. Meanwhile, Katie's family refused to give up. Patricia and her supporters created a social media campaign, Justice for Katie. They held vigils every year. They kept her name alive, determined to make sure her story was never forgotten. In 2019, the case appeared on In Pursuit with John Walsh, reigniting national attention. Walsh called John a wolf in sheep's clothing. Tips flooded in, but none led to his capture. Then, in 2022, after nearly 6 years, a cold case unit with the U.S. Marshals took over. They tracked down new leads and discovered something investigators had long suspected. Hannah Thompson still knew where John was. After finally cooperating, she told investigators that he was living in Oregon, under a new name, Ben Clean. On July 20, 2022, U.S. Marshals began surveillance on a home in Medford. They confirmed their suspect had a distinctive tattoo, a pirate on his arm, the same one noted in John's file. When they confronted him, he tried to deny who he was, but it was over. After 6 years on the run, the man who once thought he could outsmart the law was finally caught. For Patricia, that call was everything. "I was over the moon," she said. "That was such a great day." In October 2022, Hannah Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. But she agreed to cooperate, becoming the prosecution's key witness. John's trial began in September 2024, nearly 8 years after Katie's death. Prosecutors laid out everything: his Google searches, texts to Hannah, and a disturbing journal entry that read, "Someday I hope you understand why I did it." Witnesses recalled him bragging about killing Katie and plotting to take her life insurance money. Hannah testified that John told her he was going to do it, and later confessed that he had. The defense tried to argue there was no solid DNA evidence, but the jury wasn't convinced. After just 5 hours, the verdict was unanimous: guilty on all charges. John Blavelt was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For Katie's family, it was justice, but not closure. A year later, Hannah Thompson received only 3 years of probation. Katie's mother called it a slap on the wrist and a punch in the gut, vowing to keep fighting in her daughter's name. Today, Katie's story stands as a tragic reminder of how love can twist into obsession and how silence in the face of abuse can turn deadly. Her light was stolen too soon, but through those who continue to speak her name, it still shines.